Yo, 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 what's going on, YouTube? It's your boy Nate the Great coming at you with another live. You already know if you're new to the channel, like, share, comment, and subscribe. To all the returning friends and family, you already know it's peace and blessings. I'm gonna give y'all some time to tune in. Apologies for earlier. I did have this live scheduled for 2:30, but eh, kind of got a late day in as far as sleeping. So, and that's the one thing I'm gonna tell a lot of y'all. When your body is telling you to sit back and relax, that's what you got to do sometimes. Even us as content creators, we got to realize sometimes we just got to get the ample rest, especially when we got to do what we need to do, especially when it comes to bringing the content. But apologies, y'all. Hood, what's going on? Yo, Hood, don't come in here with that bullshit, nigga. You ain't going to pull up nothing. Know what you can pull up? Pull up that Michael Jordan jersey you owe me, son. Stop playing with me, son. Come over here with that, son. Come over here with that. Shout out to my brother Hood. Better pull up that blunt. That's what you better do, son. You come over here with that. Don't come over here with that. Don't bring that Michael Jordan heat in here, son. Don't come over here, son. Come over here. You already know I'm filling up this coffee pot again, so you know. First things first. Hopefully everybody's having a blessed and productive Monday. Hopefully everybody enjoyed their weekend. Hopefully everybody was safe. No, you won't. Hood, you know what you're going to do? You might slap me. You might slap me. But you're going to slap me with that Michael Jordan jersey. I'm going to need you to take that LeBron jersey off and put on a Kobe jersey. You need to do that, son. Come over here with that fake Laker fan shit. But first things first, again, hopefully everybody had a blessed and productive weekend as well. For those that were celebrating birthdays or celebrating birthdays, yes, we know it's Virgo season. Hopefully y'all enjoyed y'all's times out. Hopefully y'all made the best out of your events. Another year, another blessing around the sun. Y'all already know. James, what's going on, my guy? Come on, Hood. Don't come over here with that. I'll be flaming when I need to be flaming, son. Come on, son. I see you, James. Coffee cups in the chat. You already. But yeah, hopefully everybody did enjoy their weekends. Hopefully everybody kept themselves cool. I know in certain areas, y'all still suffering a little heat wave. For others, it's been kind of decent. Starting to feel like the fall weather again. Those that got to be out and about, just make sure you dress appropriately because, the weather tend to switch up at times. Riaz, what's going on, my guy? Appreciate everybody that tuned in for the conversation. I believe it was Friday. No, my fault. Appreciate everybody that tuned in Saturday for the conversation. For those that were following me on Vertical, apologies because I felt a little disrespected talking for almost 40 minutes to find out my microphone. I don't know, for some reason it wasn't working as well. People said they couldn't really hear me. So until I figure out what I need to figure out with this Vertical, I'm going to be bringing whatever on here. So, but appreciate everybody that tuned in for the conversation. Appreciate everybody that, gave in some good input during the conversation. And like I said, that conversation will be revisited because, at some point we need to have these little in-depth talks. It actually says a lot and it actually brings clarity to a lot of different things. But for those that missed it, you can definitely catch this replay. And for those in the shadows watching today as well too, um, again, appreciate every last one of y'all who have been sharing the brother out and actually been popping in and, just doing what you've been doing. Like I said, y'all are an important factor to the building, to the brand. Hold on, before my mouth go left, I already know. Um, just a light conversation today. I want to ask y'all, what do y'all see being the key steps to building generational wealth? Um, question need to be asked because with everything that's been going on in the world around us, we see that some things are taking a major hit. Um, some things are actually being done to benefit us, others not so much. Reason why I said it's important to start finding ways to build generational wealth because you want to make sure that even when you're long gone, the people not just within your immediate family, but the people who really are deserving of it will at least have some way to continue on with the blueprint. Basically, I say there's multiple ways to build structure and also build that generational wealth, but it depends on what you're trying to build. Like some people are building generational wealth you know, by just implementing the simplest things. Like there's some people who are building generational wealth as far as the hair care and the hair products are concerned. Um, and that's a good start right there. I mean, if you know about the human anatomy, if you know about hair and everything else, uh, you could get into that because again, you could be an important part, especially for people who have either issues with their hair or they just can't seem to get it right. You know, because we all got different textures of hair. Some of us have what you would call nappy hair, but you could build or be a part of building the best straighteners, especially if it's natural. He's dad, what's going on, my guy? You could be a part of that because again, you just gotta know what the people want. For some of y'all, I feel like business or just building any form of business can be a step to generational wealth. For some people, hey, your generational wealth could start by opening up a food market, not a fast food joint, but a food market. You know, it's right now, as you see in the supermarkets, you know, some of the stuff that we're accustomed to getting at a decent price, now it's starting to go up. But you could be a person that changes all of that. You know, you could actually be one of the handful that does that. Build you a decent food market, you know, and sell good items. Like generational wealth could start from the simplest things, like I said. It all depends on what you're doing. Diddy, baby. Serious, baby. Yeah, this is money making Monday for a lot of y'all. Including me. Oh, man. But prime example, if you structured on trying to build a business, the business that you're going to build will definitely be generational. Like, look, prime example, some of these supermarkets that we known for as long as we've been on this earth, a generation. You know, they started in a certain time frame. It's done been passed down either within the family or friends of the family, or it was given to the right people because it's keeping those brands still going to today. And that's why I said it's important. You know, trying to build generational wealth or trying to at least get there. You know, we are all multifaceted when it comes to certain things. For some people, it's not really hard to try to get in that position of building. It's just again, what do you see yourself building, and how far are you willing to take it? You know, like what I was saying about the supermarkets. For some of y'all, that would be a good look. You know, purchasing the building, trying to get your hands on the main things that you need, key items, and all of that, because you could actually be a part of the change. Like prime example, you could be building that supermarket, and that supermarket could go towards, you know, looking out for those who, might not be able to afford the high prices. Not saying that we don't have, decent or cheap supermarkets, but some of those cheap supermarkets don't sell what you need. It's not so much as what you want, it's what you need. You know, you could be that change in everything. You know, again, some people are going to have financial struggles. Some people ain't going to be able to afford those high prices when it comes to those things. But if you are one of them that stands out from the rest, you'll definitely gain traction. You know, and if you're selling the items that are definitely needed, you know, especially fresh produce, that's a good look. See, that's another way you could try to get into generational building and wealth by getting into the food markets, like as far as farming, agriculture. You know, some of y'all be thinking that these farmers and these producers ain't building, but technically they are building. You know, they building from the ground up, they building from scratch. You know, and that's important to look at for real. You know, anything could definitely be a game changer for you. You just gotta know what your lane is, and like I said, knowing how to build and knowing when to, when to structure everything out. Not gonna lie to you though, for some of y'all, I would say generational building. It can really start from no matter what you put your mindset to. If you feel like that's something you want to get into as far as food and produce, then why not jump into that field? Like I said, you could definitely be a game changer at some point. For those with the hair care products and everything else, that's also a good step too, because again, we need, different items and different products, especially if it's going to help us in the long run, you know. But like I said, it also shows a blueprint and gives a blueprint to those coming behind. And that's the good thing about generational wealth and building, because again, even when you're long gone, your family could keep everything in motion, keep the structure going. And I feel that's important, building something to where the people could get behind it and back it up. Another thing I was saying about generational wealth is it does start with education as well too. Um, it starts with education because again, you have to have knowledge on the things that you're trying to get into. You have to have in-depth, knowledge when it comes to that. Like prime example, your generational wealth could be automotive repairs and dealing with cars. That's generational wealth right there in this building, because guess what? You can have an automotive shop that could be around for decades, if not shoot centuries. You know, I know at some point, things are going to change when it comes down to, vehicles and all of that. These things are adamant to happen because look at some of the things that's happened now. Like prime example with the AI situation. That's building towards generational wealth. That's also building something for the future. But the only thing about AI to a degree is that, it depends on what the scenario is. The AI could definitely be good in shape shifting certain aspects of the playing field. But it could also be a downfall because if you rely too much on it, it takes away from the nostalgia of building. Like prime example, look, we have some people who have lost their jobs in these automotive fields because they're being replaced by technology. It's almost the same way with some of the fast food joints too, being replaced by robots. Now, I've seen some videos where you think it should be at least more than 20 employees working. You probably might have 2 to 5 at best, and the rest of the work is being done by robots. Keith, what's going on, my guy? That's what I'm saying. We got to figure out exactly what it is that we could put into the future of generational building. Like I said, I believe AI is definitely going to be a game changer to some degree. And for the people that are creating it or that have already started advancing in it, that's giving generational wealth. Whether we want to believe it or not, it is. Because again, it's giving a focal blueprint to those coming behind. And that's what you want to do. You want to leave the best imprint for life when it comes down to that type of building. You know, but some of y'all, again, if you into the automotive field or if you into all of that, you know, just by starting that small business right there, it could lead to bigger and better opportunities. Because prime example, somebody's always going to need fixtures and always going to need their car fixed or looked at. You know, when you are keeping those type of scenarios intact, again, you're basically bringing back something. And if you're good at what you do, if there's no snafus, guess what? That type of scenario will bring more and more people into your place of business. See, that's the thing. If you are going to build generationally, you want to make sure that the people keep coming back. You want to make sure that the people always, will come back to that professional setting. And that's the key thing again. Like I was just saying about the supermarkets. If you are one of those who are doing what's necessary for the building, for the brand, guess what? People will start coming into your shops more often. Some of y'all could build generational wealth, like I said, doing clothing. I spoke about this one time before. There's a lot of y'all who are trying to get into that field and do that business of clothes. To be quite honest, that's always going to be a generational building too, because we all need clothing. Some of us are not going to be able to fit into the skinny wear like some of these people are. So you could be one of those that change up or add something to what's already been done. We know we got big and tall sections, but some of these places, hey, it's almost like it's fading out. Because like I said, not everybody could wear the skinny clothes, the skinny jeans, all of that. Especially for some big dudes and big women, y'all do need to be able to wear certain things that fit your body, but also gives you comfortability. And that's the most important thing. You could be a part of that. There's not too many big and tall places, but you could be one of them that do that. Like, look, I don't do nothing but just big and tall people. Okay, cool. Now all you got to do is, set the tone. Figure out what clothes, everything from jeans to t-shirts, hoodies, things along those lines. And make sure that you always keep everything in stock that you need. Now, in some scenarios, you might be overstocked on certain clothing items, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go to waste. Like, the fashion always changes throughout the season, and that's important. Again, having a huge variety of the things that you need, at least in that field right there. Because prime example, you might have enough t-shirts on display as far as for the big and tall, but you might not have enough hoodies. You might not have enough, bedroom stuff like pajamas and things like that. You could be an instant part of that. You could build your own little company, little LLC. You could definitely get the tools that you need, the materials that you need, and you could be a part of building that. The one thing about clothes is that you got to remember, it's not so much as just having something to put on your back. It's also having some form of style, some form of uniqueness to it. Like I've been in a big and tall section where you wouldn't expect certain things for a big and tall person, but hey, these is coming from independent companies or coming from independent people that just, know what's needed. And that's the most important thing, is knowing what you need exactly. Fast food restaurants will be all robots. You will pay with your card or buy your phone in the future. Yeah, in some instances, that is true, James. Some of these fast food restaurants, like I said, I've seen a couple videos where you got maybe 2 or 3 workers at best doing something and everything else is being done by a machine. But see, we also got to remember too, in some forms of businesses, can't just be super reliant on the machines. Like prime example, do you expect the machine to cook your food? No, you still got to cook. You still got to be able to do what's necessary, whether you work in a fast food restaurant or whether you work in an actual restaurant. This is why in some scenarios we still have chefs. We still have, people that are working in those fields and keeping their jobs. Because again, we're not expecting no damn AI robot to cook food. And especially again, when it comes to preparing food, no matter what it is, you still have to make sure it has proper seasoning. You have to make sure that you're putting in just the right amount of things. And then, the ingredients have to be fresh. You know, these are things that's important. Appreciate you for dropping those links, serious, baby. Working hard in my damn coffee pot, baby. But, this is what I'm saying. When you know exactly what you need and what's needed for the build, you start moving from there. And I think that's very important. Knowing what you need, so you could get to that next stage. But also teaching those who are coming behind you how things work, the ins and outs, basically. Because if they don't know the ins and outs and you decide to pass it along, they could make one simple mistake and turn everything that you worked hard for into a disaster. Seen this happen in so many different occasions. Some people have gotten hold of businesses or gotten hold of scenarios where everything was building accordingly, and then you make the wrong mistake, you make the wrong investment, and now the companies are going belly up. But the one thing to remember too is not being too greedy while you're trying to build. That's something that's really important. Again, making sure you know all the key factors that are important to that build. Oh, what you mean no coffee? Oh, too late. Too late. I'm already on my second cup. Too late. See, prime example. When I was saying about the food situation, you gotta think about it. There are some people who are allergic to certain ingredients. So you gotta take that into accountability as well, too. You gotta take that into full swing. Like prime example, there's some people who can't eat the natural things that are supposed to be good for our body. Like, look, you have some people who can't eat bananas. You got some people who can't eat peanuts or cashews, anything along the nut family, basically. You got some people who can't eat chocolate. You got some people who might have issues as far as dealing with acidity and all of that. If you're gonna be in a food, if you're gonna be in a food portion of things, you gotta make sure that number one, you serve a multitude of things, because you got to think about it. Not everybody can eat the same thing. Some people don't eat pork, or some people can't eat pork. Some people can't eat beef. Some people, as healthy as chicken is as far as an option is concerned, some people might not be able to eat chicken. So, you got to be able to make sure that if you're going to get into that field of play, you got to make sure you basically opening up what needs to be opened up. So if you're going to get into that field, prime example, make sure that you have all the fresh ingredients, but also make sure you have a variety of things that you can serve to the people. Like prime example, I just seen something in the store the other day. Apparently, these are supposed to be cookies. When shoot, the next time I'm in there, I'm gonna take a picture or whatever, and I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about. But apparently, with those brand of cookies, those is for people who have peanut allergies, chocolate allergies, or allergies to wheat, certain things like that. So basically, it's supposed to almost be like vegan chips or vegan cookies. But I actually tasted one of them suckers, and it ain't not too bad. It helps because, prime example, again, if you have a peanut allergy, and let's say you are making cookies or you making certain items that do have peanuts in it, Let's say if that person don't know there's peanuts in it and they decide to try out something, you know, they could possibly go into a food allergy. They could possibly end up being in the hospital because of that. Or worse, because there are some people who have had food allergies that cause their untimely demises. So these are things you have to think about. You know, if you're going to get into that business, make sure you have all the proper things needed. So this way, you know, the people won't be set up for failure. And I think that's important, you know, because you definitely don't want to see somebody laid up in the hospital because of something that they couldn't eat. But I would also say this too, for some people, if you know you have specific allergies, you also let these people know. Like prime example, if you go into a restaurant, if you know there's certain things you can't eat on that menu, you know, you order what you can order, but also make sure that if you're gonna order, make sure that whatever you order doesn't have those things in it. Because prime example, there's some foods that have pork in it, but you will never notice that because they don't let it be known. So you know that's important as well too. Main thing is, you know, making sure that you not getting over on the people while you're building, you know, but letting them know, fair warning, or look, this might have this in it. I don't know if this is going to be right for you, but it's the same way with selling clothes. You need to make sure that, you know, you have the right type of things for the people. Because prime example, well, I don't have this shirt in this size, but I have it in this size if you're able to fit it. You know, at least you're giving the warning, you're giving the heads up. And then now you're giving that person the opportunity to decide if that's still what they're going to run with or if they're going to try something else. See, that's the thing. Also, with generational building and trying to build towards generational wealth, you got to remember at some points, you know, you might have something that failed, or you might have tried something new, it didn't work out as planned. Okay, that doesn't mean the grind stops. No, you continue to keep pushing around. You just gotta shelf whatever it is you was trying, at least until you're able to get to a better standpoint. You know, like prime example in the food businesses. You know, if you was trying out a certain new item as far as, you know, what you serving, and you know you didn't get rave reviews, okay, well, go back to the drawing board. You know, that don't mean just because the people don't like it that you stop doing business or that you just quit altogether. No, you know, that just means whatever you was trying, you know, put it on the back burner for now. Or, you know, at least figure out what you can do to improve that product and then you bring it back. Like prime example, I'm gonna go back to the clothing. We see that when it comes to fashion, there are some things that is gonna be a revolving door, which it is. It's a revolving door. Like fashion is a revolving door. Because what might be popular today might not be popular next week. What's popular this month might not be popular at all next month. But at some point, it will get back to being popular. You know, like, look, prime example. There are some people who are getting back to the stages of this. How you say it? The jumper pants, basically, with the suspenders on it. Now, you know, we all done had a pair of jumpers, pair of corduroy, Oshkosh, whatever. We all had those back in the day. Now, at one point, you know, it completely disappeared. But now it seems like to some degree is slowly starting to make a change back or starting to come back. Now, some things, once they go out of style, they ain't never coming back. And now we've seen one or two scenarios, like prime example. If anybody in here could tell me that they seen people with bell bottoms on, and I mean the old school bell bottoms, please let me know. But you know, like that's something that's went out of style, and even if you think to bring it back, it might not hit the same. You know, in some instances, the same thing with the the jumper suits, things like that. Now, in some instances, it's kind of making the trend, but in others, you know, it played out, and it's not going to be the same again. Velour suits, prime example. Everybody had at one point a damn velour suit. I don't care if it was Sean, John, Fubu, whatever. At one point, everybody had a damn velour suit. Now they disappeared for a minute, but in some instances, it looks like they slowly starting to make its way back. So again, if you're going to get into the fashion field, as far as your generational wealth is concerned, your generational building, you have to make sure that no matter what items you're putting out there, you make sure that even if it does get to a point where it fades out a little bit, you can always bring it back. You know, and in some instances, if you feel like you have to take it down for whatever reason just to improve the product, do so. I've always felt like that. No matter what you do, if you sit back and try to improve whatever product that you have going, because you can have multiple products going on. One or two of them might not fully make, might not make the cut. But if it don't make the cut that time frame, don't just toss out the whole idea. Just figure out ways to make it better. You know. Yeah, I know, James. I went back to the 70s, but this is what I'm saying. But think about it. There was a lot of things back in the 70s. Prime example that is starting to make their way back slowly, even into this generation now. So it's not like it's far off. Like I said, fashion is a revolving door. Again, what might not, what might have faded out or what ain't as popular right now, at some point it'll start getting popular again. Especially amongst the ladies. And that's the most important thing too. You want to make sure you got the right type of things for the ladies just as well as the gentlemen. Shoot. Polyester suits. We know polyester ain't never going to go out of style because polyester is a damn fabric. It's a material. There are some shirts and pants and things along those lines still being made with polyester. But that's also something to remember too. You have some people who could be allergic to certain materials. So if you're going to build, as far as the clothing is concerned, you need to make sure that whatever materials you're using, it's not going to give somebody that allergic reaction or have them breaking out into hives. These are things that's important. The most important thing to remember. You know, but yeah, again, we got to think about, you know, what's going to be something that's going to be revolutionary for the future. You know, and that is important. Building for a better tomorrow. Getting to a place where you don't have to worry about suffering in the long run. Because again, we don't know how things are going to change as far as financially. We don't know how the stock markets might change. We don't know how just everything in general will change. You know, gotta think about it. For some things, for some scenarios, guess what? You might have a day where everything is where it need to be. You gonna have other days where you're gonna take a hit. You know, we don't know where the world's finances will be in the next few years, but you want to make sure that no matter what you're building, it's not going to damage your brand as a whole, and it's not going to make you go belly up in the long run. Again, learning the ins and outs. And that's really key. Again, learning and building. And again, just having a better understanding. And that's the key to the generational wealth and building. Just having a clear understanding of what's needed, what's not needed, what's important, what's not important. But again, also again, making sure that the products that you're presenting or whatever you might be presenting is going to be helpful and useful to the community. Like prime example, there are some food chains and food businesses, prime example. They do things a little different. Like where some chains and some companies be throwing out, stuff that they don't necessarily have to throw out. These other ones will, you know, they will do something for the community. Prime example. There was one chicken place that I used to visit when I used to go in Manhattan. and I respected that chicken place. I think they might still be open. I gotta find out because it's been a minute since I've been on that side of Manhattan. But they used to do this in the nighttime. Prime example. Me and my boys used to be coming from these little open mic shows and lounges and stuff like that. They would close up around maybe 2, 3 in the morning. The reason why they would close that late is because they was also taking all the chicken, all what French fries, whatever they basically had, not so much as on the display counter, but everything that they had just fried up and made fresh, they would give it to the homeless. They would give it to those less fortunate. And if you wasn't homeless, guess what? You might have had a family full of kids. Like I can remember one night, the lady came in there to order, I think it was 32 pieces of chicken, something like that, because she had like at least 4 or 5 kids with her. That man only made her pay for one thing, which was, the food item. Guess what that man did? That man gave her more than 32 pieces of chicken. He damn near gave her 60 pieces of chicken. So just in case, you never know. All right, just in case of whatever, at least you still got something for tomorrow. And I think that was the best thing he could do. Shoot, it was one night me and my boys came in there. I came to get something simple. He gave me all the extra stuff. Why? There wasn't nothing wrong with the food either. Just they had already just fried and did whatever. But being how it got slow during the evening, they ain't want the food to go to waste. And that's respected. You know, shit, even some of these supermarkets that do the same thing. They will sit here and not toss out things that they know for a fact they could be giving out. Because again, you're gonna have some people who have hard times. Or you're gonna have some people that, guess what? You do things like that brings the right type of promotion and business to you. See, like that dude doing that with that lady that night, guess what? She spread the word around her neighborhood. That following night, man, listen, and I'm telling you, his place was packed. Like it was like a lunchtime situation. His place was packed. Yeah, because again, when you're doing certain things for the right type of people, guess what? It comes back tenfold. You know, you might have helped me out with something. Now, let me try to help you out. It was almost like an eye for an eye. Yeah, he did her that favor, and gave her extra chicken, fries, and all of that. But guess what? She brought extra business to his place. So you know, whatever generational wealth you want to build within the community, as long as there's an eye for an eye and a reciprocation on things, trust me, these things can work. California, baby. For those that just tuned in, make sure y'all hit that like button. But yeah, that helps. That helps in so many ways. Because again, we don't know what's going to happen in these next few years. We don't know what could happen in the next 10 years. But in some situations, it's going to be worse before it gets better. But we can make things better if we take the opportunity and again take advantage of the resources that are being given. Just like I said, if you run a food business of any sort, you don't necessarily have to resort to using robots or using machines to do your work. Because again, I feel like to some degree, it takes away from the nostalgia and the essence of building properly. Because you got to think about it. In certain instances, technology can make a mistake. We've seen this happen. Prime example. You could have been typing in something simplest thing like your birthday, putting it into a certain database, and they'll sit there and mess that up. Because I'm quite sure there's some of y'all who you did the right things as far as putting in information and doing what you need to do, and technology has messed you up, and now you gotta go back to redoing something because of your problem. And that's what I'm saying. Yes, technology is great in certain aspects of the game because again, it's needed. Technology is always going to be needed because some of y'all who don't have physical places, prime example. Like there are some food places who they don't have no physical dining areas or none of that. They are what you would consider a virtual cafe, basically. You know, but again, you still got to serve something. So, it's good because it's supposed to be helping you with your business. It's supposed to be also, bringing it to a point where you could get yourself, a physical dining hall and all of that. I've always felt when it does come down to food, it's supposed to have all the proper stages of building. You need a great location. You definitely need a spacious location because, prime example, if you run in a restaurant, you want to be able to seat enough people in it. You want to be at least saying I could seat more than 100 people in my venue. With some spots, it's so narrow you could barely fit 10 people in there. I walked into one place of business and I don't understand how it's still open to this day. It's like a little corner pizza shop, but it's like it's so narrow in there sometimes, especially if it gets a crowd, you could at best have 5 to 10 people in there at best. And at some point you're gonna want to upgrade. You're gonna want to upgrade. You're gonna want to find a different location or a better location for that. But for some of these people, they've made it this far even with what they got because they're doing things modestly. And you have to do that. You know, and that's the truth, California. I mean, in some instances, AI is definitely taking over a lot of the places that it's starting to look weird and feel weird. Like I just watched a video with this one girl. I think she was working at McDonald's. It was only her and one other co-worker, and everything else is being done by a machine. You know? But I feel like this: it's a craft when it comes down to the food portion of things. It is a craft. You know, AI can't make you a great burger. A robot can't make great food, but a human can. Word, what's going on, my guy? The link is pinned in case anybody want to chime in during this convo. But it's the truth. Think about it. You know, yes, you know, technology is good on certain sorts, but in other instances, is becoming a hindrance to some because it's almost essentially like these food chains are going to be hiring less and less people, which I feel is sad because here it is, we have a problem in the country now. We have homelessness at a high rate. We have people who are losing jobs at a high rate, especially those who are working in these fields where they are being replaced by technology. But if you always make sure to keep a plan B tucked somewhere in the tuck, you could be able to maneuver around that. It's important that while you all working, or like I said, whether it's for self or whether it's for somebody, when you're working, start building, continue to keep building, save up some money. Whether you put some money in a bank or you do it the old school way, put your money in a shoebox. It's important. The reason why I say it's important because again, just in case if something does happen, you would at least have some form of backing. You would at least have something to where you could take that for a rainy day, the rainy day stash basically, and build something from that. In certain scenarios, life is like chess or checkers. You're gonna have to play the game, but your main focus is thinking, strategy. Like that's the thing, though. You're always gonna have to go to the drawing board when it comes to certain things because again, you gotta strategize. If you want to monopolize, you have to be able to think strategically. You have to be able to know that what you're putting out there is your best product, and you gotta also make sure that the people not just love it, but hey, if some people feel they want to help back it, or if some people want to be a part of that, is giving them that option to do so. I think that's key to any form of generational building. You just gotta have so many different varieties and ways to attack and keep yourself on boat. That's it. Keep yourself on the boat and not get knocked off the boat. Like again, knowing what to invest in, making sure that even if you're going to invest in certain, businesses, or you're going to invest into certain properties to do what you're going to do, just make sure that it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. Like prime example, for some that's in the food business, some of these people will keep their original spots. Some people will get to a point where they're going to grow and get multiple spots. But you want to make sure that if you are getting to that point of gaining multiple spots and multiple venues, again, you want to be able to make sure you can seat and fit enough people in it. But also make sure it's not violating how they say the fire safety codes. Because you see in some spots they say they can only allow only up to a certain amount of people within an establishment before it becomes a fire hazard or a safety hazard. And that's the one thing too. Reminding yourself that during that generational building, you got to be able to make sure that you're not at capacity. You know, you don't want to go over the capacity limit either. But even when it comes down to you thinking, when it comes down to you strategizing, don't overload your brain. Because I know for some people, once you start getting a great idea on something, you start thinking about all the multiple options. But again, you got to remember some of those options that you think might be good, it could actually be a hindrance, or it could actually make you lose something. That's the one thing you want to make sure you're not doing, is losing too much. I mean, like I said, not everything is going to be successful. You're going to have some failures, but it depends on, how much you invested into it. And even if you have to put it on the back burner, at least okay, well, I could come back to this at some point. Maybe this might be able to work in a different setting, different time, and a different place. Again, you don't never want to just throw away everything that you are building. Like I said, generational building, shoot, you can start that just by trying to better the education for the people. Some people, generational building is that. You know, I'm that passionate about education and educating the people. Okay, well, how do I keep doing that? How do I do something that's going to keep building for the future? You know, like prime example, I could say libraries, even though some of these libraries are slowly closing up. You know, we were just having this talk and discussion the other week. But that's a form of generational build, and that's also a form of generational wealth, because guess what? In some instances, you're going to have to go to the library because there are things that are not posted up on social media or Wikipedia and all these other things that they're trying to use now. You're going to have to go and actually get the book. You got to get a physical copy. It's almost like with technology right now. It's like prime example. I'm going to use for the people that do the gaming, whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, or all these things, right? Yeah, they got stores on the game console that you could purchase games or you could get free games. But you also got to think too. In some instances, they might not have the games that you want in these stores. So now you got to go and get a physical copy of it. You know, like prime example, they might not have the edition of a game that you're looking for. But if you go into one of these gaming stores, 9 out of 10, you're gonna find it. So again, you just gotta think on that level. What can I do, even as times are changing? What can I do to make sure I keep the brand together, make sure I'm in the right direction, and also make sure that the people behind me and around me are learning, gaining all the info, and making sure they're able to follow the same path. Because in order for certain things to run smoothly, everybody has to be on the same page. Like in some instances, you can't run a company when everybody is not on the same page. Like if you working in the marketing department, y'all at least got to be able to come together on, on certain things. But you also got to be able to say, well, this is something that we all agree on that we know could possibly work, and then you get from it. Like I said, generational building for some of y'all, it could be learning the ins and outs of the stock market, learning the importances of businesses and trades and commerce and all of that. It's important. You know, if you know the ins and outs of that, if you know what you're willing to do, then you got to do it. Now, see, in some instances, when dealing with that, yes, you got to make sure you got some form of an education, but you also might have to take a program to make sure you are definitely on point with it. Because I knew one or two people who were supposed to be in the stock market. One of them passed away recently, but he was almost on the way. You know, he had a knack for numbers. And see, that's my thing. Generational building starts from whatever talents and whatever skill set you have as far as your life is concerned. Chill, will, baby. So again, making sure that you're in the best positions, making sure you know what's right, what's needed, and then from there you move forward. Because again, when it's all said and done, you don't want to be left with nothing. You don't want to be in a situation where you could have made something happen and you didn't. And in some of these cases, even while generational building is happening, you're going to have to take some risk. There's nothing wrong with taking calculated risk, especially again, at some point, it can help you. It's going to give you a lesson, basically. All right, well, I tried this. The people didn't really resonate with this. I did get some good feedback, but you know what? Let me just push this to the back for now. Let me continue to work on the things, or let me continue to push the things that I know is actually working. See, that's the thing. No matter what kind of building you're trying to get into, you got to remember, you're going to need the people for that back end and for that support. And not so much as from the financial standpoint, like we got to back you up. No, you want the people to keep coming back. You want the people to keep coming to you because you reputable. You know, like prime example. You see how some people are doing things when it comes down to filing taxes and doing whatever. They're not just filing with anybody. They're going to file with somebody that's reputable to them. They're going to file with people who are doing right by them. And that's the main thing to remember. Making sure you're doing right by the people while you serving the people. I think that's important, you know. And that's the thing. I hear you, Chill Will. That's anybody. The one thing again to remind yourself is, some things are not going to be easy to do. But, if you set yourself right, if you are determined on trying to make it, you can make it. Because like I said before, the only thing that stops you from getting to your truest potential in life is you. The only other thing that could stop you from getting to your full potential of life is that higher power if he calls you home. Other than that, you are basically the only thing that stops you from being the best you. So you gotta know what you need, know what's necessary, and then you build from there. James number 8, what's going on? Like I told somebody the other day too when I was out and about, you know, you never you never doubt yourself. I don't care what's being thrown at you. You have to make sure you have a strong mind and a strong spirit, because those are going to be your key elements. You need a strong backbone as well, too. You got to be willing to say, no matter what's happening, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to stop myself from getting to that highest level of expectation. But you also have to have a reasonable expectation when it comes to yourself. I mean, yeah, you could push your limits to some degree, but the thing is not over pushing yourself, not overworking yourself. And that's the key element, at least what I feel like when it comes down to generational building. you could get to the highest places. You can do what's necessary for you and yours. But again, you got to be willing to work. You got to be willing to take that time and effort out, because it's not going to be easy. Some people think, oh, I could just get into this and it's just going to work out right away. You might have things that you still are unaware of. You might not have full knowledge on. So you don't want to fully jump out the window. I'm going to give a prime example. Like, prime example, this podcasting thing. And I'm going to use me as an example. I didn't jump out the window. When I first even started doing any form of content, prime example, I was just doing uploads. I didn't know nothing about a StreamYard. You know, didn't know that StreamYard was going to be one of the biggest things you can use as far as doing the live streams. And when I did started doing some of the live streams, I was doing it straight from the YouTube app itself. When I found out you could go live, you could do all the extra stuff from the app itself, I started from there. When I got a better understanding of StreamYard and how it works and what you can utilize it for, you know, that's when I started doing a little bit more, you know, started getting more interactive, started getting more in tune with the people. Some people think you're just going to be able to come into a podcast space and, yeah, everything going to take off. I'm going to get all the subs. I'm going to get all the people. Now, it's not saying that you can't, because if you have people that you know on the back end personally that really support you, if you are promoting yourself the way you're supposed to promote yourself, and if the people rock with you generally, then guess what? You can get your numbers. You can get the people behind you. But if you plan on trying to do something else further than that, it's going to take a little bit more than that. Like for some people that's trying to get paid on here, prime example, you have to do a lot. And I've already shown somewhat of a blueprint that works for me. Some of y'all know that been here for the longest. Shoot, I was going live at least 3-4 times out the day. But almost every time I went live, what was it? I was giving you something that you needed, not what you wanted. I gave you what you needed. A great conversation. I had some great people come up on these panels, have some real good talks, bring some real good, fresh ideas when it comes to certain aspects of building and growing. And that means something to me, and that actually made me feel better about this, because at one point I thought I was just going to leave it alone. But if I would have allowed myself to give up, I would have been missing out on a lot of different things. I wouldn't have met some of the great people that I met. I wouldn't have been able to build and grow and laugh and just do that with some of the greatest people that I've met and still are here to this day. See, prime example, I know word you still somewhere in the shadows. You are one of those people because you build differently and you doing it from a different standpoint, There's a lot of y'all, even down to the supporters. There are a lot of you great supporters who have been, great to the content. You added towards the conversation. You brought liveliness to a safe zone, basically. One thing to remember is that when you are building, no matter what level you're building on, you want to make sure you also have a safe space, not just for the people, but also for yourself. Because you got to think about it. For some people, content comes easy. For others, they don't really have content. They just push that live button because they just, want to interact with the people. And for some people, that's cool, but if you plan on building or trying to do something better, you can't just press a live button. Sometimes you're not just going to be able to have a casual talk or a check-in. You got to be able to bring something of substance. And that's the key thing when it comes down to generational building, is having substance all around the board. You want to be able to say that even if one or two things don't work, I got other things that are going to bring all, all the greatness out of me. And that's the thing, striving for greatness on all levels. It could be done. It's not hard to do. But it does solely, start with you. What do you feel you could bring to the table? What can you continuously bring to the forefront that's gonna give that, that's gonna give that good old um product of yours more value? And it could be done. It could definitely be done. But again, it solely lies on you. What do you see yourself building after you get to your goals, basically? If you had a set goal, like I said, and now you've gotten to that place, what do you see yourself doing from there? You know, how do you continue to keep yourself afloat? And that's another thing about generational building, at least from what I've seen. Gotta be able to keep it to where you're gonna continuously keep building no matter what's going on, even down with stock markets and inflation and everything. You want to make sure that you're able to still stay afloat and maintain. It's not just sustaining, but also maintaining. And if you can't maintain certain things, you're bound to crumble. But if you can maintain a strong presence, a strong will, and if you're able to, just keep yourself in a positive mind state, even when going through negative, you continuously keep building, and keep growing. These are things that's important, But like I said, sitting down and basically writing down your thoughts and ideas, and also getting views and opinions from different folks. Prime example. You don't want to just put a product out and you're not getting some form of feedback from the people, because you don't know how it might, you don't know how it might end up. You might think, all right, I could bring this product out. But if you ain't getting no form of feedback from anybody, even the people within your community, it could fail. So, you want to have this all around the board, in-depth conversation, not just with the people that you're building with, or but you want to make sure that the people in the community are being a part of that step. Like prime example, you decide you want to create, and you end up getting the funds and the backings, right? And you decide you want to recreate or bring back some of these educational programs, right? You could be doing that. And again, you're helping towards the step of generational building. Because again, people have to have knowledge on the things that they're doing. I have to have knowledge on the things that they're trying to see become successful. Lara, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on, sis? But you want to make sure you definitely have, a strong mind, strong will, hard work and determination and dedication. You have to be dedicated to building. Like I was saying with me, prime example, I could have left this space because at one point I felt like it wasn't serving a purpose. But then I realized something. It is serving a purpose. You know, it's serving a purpose because you're bringing something that some people are not bringing. Some people are not bringing that real, raw, gritty conversation. Some people are scared to have these talks that most people like me ain't gonna have, ain't gonna be afraid to have, you know. So that's why I kept going, kept building. I'm not just doing it, for myself. Not just doing it for nothing else. But like I said, we all need that. Like prime example. I felt like me coming here to a degree, I was a breath of fresh air for some people, you know. And to some degree, I'm still a breath of fresh air to some people, because there's not too many people that's standing on their principles and standing their ground when it comes down to building, or when it comes down to just having these discussions and these talks. Yes, it's important that we have these talks and in-depth conversations, because again, it's about bringing back the overall thing that we're missing within the key elements of building. Some people are building, but they're not thinking. Some people are trying to change certain things, change certain aspects of life, but they just going at it blind. See, when I decided to stay here, I decided to stay here on my own consciousness, basically, because I knew if I gave up or if I quit, you know, I'd have had a lot of people disappointed as well too. But I would mostly be disappointed in myself because I looked at it like, damn, you went this hard and worked this hard just to quit now. The one thing to remember is that no matter what you're going through, even when you feel like things might not be working, in hindsight, it is working. Sometimes that's just the test of your spirit and the test of your determination. See, like I said, I was determined on not just bringing this type of content to the people, but I was determined again on just bringing a safe space, number one, for people to come create, build, and grow, and just, again, bringing the messages that I need, bringing back the whole aspect of critical thinking and getting back to a better place. Because in our society, some of the things fall apart because we're not being a part of that, not being part of that structure. We're not being a part of, you know, building something successful. Like I said, in some communities, they crime over about they don't have enough resources or they don't have enough of this. But some of y'all could actually be a part of building that. You could be a part of that. You could be a part of that building process or building something new for the future. But again, you gotta want it. You know, you can't sit here and cry about you want change and you looking for change when not willing to be a part of it. And I keep saying that because it's true. There's a lot of things that could bring generational wealth even within your community and your sets. But again, you got to be willing to do it. You can't just go by faith alone. You got to do the good works. You got to definitely, put your, you know, got to strap your boots up and you got to put your boots on the battlefield. You know, you got to be willing to move with the punches. You also got to be willing to, again, accept certain things. Like prime example, if something didn't work out the first time around, just accept that little minor setback, but also learn from that setback and know that regardless to what, certain things will change for the better. You know, but you can't be weak-minded, can't be weak-spirited. See, when you are either one of those, your plan for success, your plan for generational building and growth, it won't mean shit. I'm sorry, but it won't. But if you know what you seek, and if you know these are definitely going to be things that are going to be great for you, great for your build overall, then you continuously keep doing what's necessary. Like I said, when it comes down to generational building and growth, it's all about learning. What did you learn from these scenarios? How are you going to make these scenarios better? How are you going to be able to grow? And that's the main thing. With success comes growth. You got to know exactly how to do it. You got to know when to push far and when to fall back a little bit. You know, but again, trust in yourself, trust in the process that everything will definitely move forward. And again, watch basically your little pride and joy, your little baby, whatever you're growing. You know, and some of y'all will consider what you're building as your child. Got to make sure it has everything proper ingredients, proper food intake, all of that. It's important. But when you don't have any form of knowledge, when you don't have any form of wisdom or facts, things could fall apart for you. You know, like I said, in some instances, you can't think just because you might have some money to spend or you might have some money to invest that you could just invest in anything. Because if you again invest in the wrong thing, that could definitely take all the good things you was building towards and mess that up in one failed swoop. Like if you invest in all your money into one stock, prime example, and that stock goes belly up, you basically just lost out money. So, like, if you're going to get into that form of generational building when it comes down to stocks and bonds and investments, you need to spread and diversify your portfolio, like how they say. You got to diversify it. You can't just put everything in one stock. Because, again, look how many people have done that. They put their investments all in one stock, and that one stock went belly up. Now they either completely broke or had to start back over again. So again, it's just about having knowledge and wisdom on how you going to do things. That's it. But also just remembering too that if you do take a small bump, okay, you get back up and you learn from that. You know, key thing to remember too is when you're building, never make the same mistake twice. So I knew one or two people who made an investment. They put damn near all their money into one stock, and when that stock was either going belly up or kept losing money, when they realized that it wasn't working, they took some of that money out and invested into other stocks. Like prime example, you could have a piece of generational building just by investing in the right food market chains. Like prime example, some people do invest in fast food markets and chains on the stock market because guess what? Even when it goes down, you still are basically in a good spot. You know, some businesses are going to take hits. That's the one thing to remember. Even when you're building for yourself, you might take a hit, but the main thing to remember is not take a major hit because that major hit will definitely be uh, a key to your downfall, or it can set you back and you got to restart everything over again. You know, some people are investing in stocks when it comes to technology because, like I said, technology is still booming and it will continue to keep booming. Because again, as long as there's different things as far as technology being built, people are going to want to get behind it. They're going to want to invest in it. So, it's just key things to think about. Like I said, fast food is one of them. If you want to get into the stock bonds, technology, some of you could build generational wealth even in the health field. Because there are some people who are bringing items out even into the supermarkets that are natural items that are helping your body. So, again, it depends on where your mindset is at and how far you willing to go and how long you want to keep everything going. And even if you decide you're going to fall back from a certain position in business, you still got people around you that know what they're doing. See, it's important that when you are doing any form of foundational building, you have the right foundation. You have the right people, not just backing you, but the right people around you that know what to do just in case. Prime example, you could be building, and God forbid, you got to sit back for a little bit because of severe health issues or things along those stages. You have the right people running your business. So that's the most important thing. Making sure you have the right set of people behind you that want to see the best for you and not see you downfall. Once you get to that, trust me, there's nothing that you can't do. The sky's the limit. You know. But I feel like this. You know, again, the best form of generational building is just knowing what you're good at, knowing what you possess, and making sure that you just doing the right by it. Doing the right things by it to make sure it succeeds, make sure that it keeps growing and prospering. You don't want to get into a scenario where now, again, you might have to start from scratch again, because that's going to be the hardest thing to a degree, starting from scratch all over again. And for some people who really want to start back over, quite sure you don't. So whatever businesses you might be getting into, whether it's a side business or a full-time business, make sure you have everything that's needed. Like for some of y'all, again, you're getting into clothes, you're getting into fashion, things along those natures. Fashion will always be something that's going to be around for generations because, hey, you don't want to just go outside or you don't want to just present yourself wearing certain things and, it ain't a look. Again, some people might like what you're wearing, some people might not like what you're wearing. But it's about comfortability more than anything. Being comfortable in those clothes is the most important thing. Because you can have something that look good, but it could be too tight on you. You know, it could be cutting off your circulation. Who wants that? And you got to remember, everybody is different as far as body shape and all that. Everybody's different. So you want to make sure, like prime example, you might get into the business of selling sneakers or making sneakers. You could be a great sneaker and boot company, prime example. If you're willing to take the time out and invest the right necessities and the right materials, you can do it. You know, you got some people right now who are independent that are making sneakers, making boots for people, and they starting to grow, they starting to flourish. They might have took some bumps, but other than that, they still going. They still trying to grind because again, the grind don't stop. And that's one thing to remember in your mind is that even when it comes to generational building, the grind should never stop. You should never be halted. And you should never halt yourself. My bad, y'all. It was my neighbor though. Shut up. But that's important though. Just remembering that, not everything is going to come easy, but it's not going to be too much of a hardship neither. You know, only time there'll be a hardship or it can become a hardship is if you overall stop your motion and just quit. That's the one thing to remember. You got to stay in motion no matter what. Key element to everything is just seeing the bigger picture. And if you know what the bigger picture is, if you know what the bigger goal is, then you move towards that. Truth, what's going on, my guy? I wish hold on one second. Hold on one second. Fucking dog need to shut up. Shit. What the hell you doing to that door? About to make me knock on their damn door. Shut the hell up. My bad, y'all. My bad, y'all. Shoot. But that's important. Again, knowing what you building, knowing what your main goal is, and never quit. Because the minute you decide to quit, the minute you decide to walk away from it, that could be a downfall for you. Because what you might have walked away from could have possibly been something that could bring any form of greatness to your life. And that's the most important thing too about generational building. You want to make sure that it gives you the best feeling of life. You started off with nothing, you worked hard and you grinded out to get these things in motion. And now that they're in motion, you just gotta keep yourself on a successful thinking tip. What can I do to keep my brand successful? What can I do to make sure I don't lose focus? And what can I do to make sure and assure the people that are being a part of that, you know, that the grind never stops. Again, the only person that can stop you from getting to your destination in life is you. Nobody else. If it ain't that higher power, it's you. So again, keep yourself motivated, grounded, and focused. You know, like I said, accept certain defeats because just because you might have took a loss, that doesn't mean you lost in life. You know, that doesn't mean it's the end all be all. Nah, you know, where one thing might have failed, something else might pick up and that'll be the big boomer for you, basically. You know, again, just gotta know what's needed and what's gonna be great for the people. So when you get into that point, you know, even when you feel like things ain't going right, don't quit. Keep pushing yourself forward. You know, keep yourself motivated at all times. And guess what? These things will definitely take off the ground. You know, for some people, generational building, they would consider that I'm trying to be rich. I'm trying to be the richest person, or I'm trying to be the richest whoever. No, you're already rich because you're able to wake up every day. You know, you're here for a purpose. So you're already rich because you're here. You still have a purpose. You still have things you got to accomplish. You still have things that you need to do. So just remember that portion too. You know, again, it starts with you, and it also starts with the people around you. And if the people around you want to see the best for you, then you should want to see the best for yourself as well too. So don't forget, no matter where you decide to start building or how you decide to start building, key thing to remember is never lose focus. You know, keep reaching for higher planes and expectations, and you'll see these things happen. These things will come into fruition, and when they do, you know how to maneuver from it. I was going to talk about something else today too that's off topic, but I think I'm gonna hold that off for either tomorrow or Wednesday. Um, this topic I was going to talk about is going to be different because I also want to get everybody's views and opinions on this because I think that's something that we don't speak about. And again, that would be a form of uncomfortable conversation for some, but for others, it would actually do something better. You know, it would actually bring some form of change maybe to the world, even to the cultures. So when it comes to that conversation, I also want to make sure I have my full knowledge on this because I don't want to just jump the gun. But for some people, and I'll give you a preview. Um, for some cultures or for some places in this earth, um, the age of consent, that's something that people don't speak about, but I think needs to be spoken about because I honestly feel for some reason that some of these things, like even that age of consent, needs to change. You know, prime example, age of consent to get a tattoo or to get piercings, things along those lines. What do y'all think is a decent consent age for that? 22, what's going on, my guy? Like I said, what's a decent consent age for somebody that's coming up? Like, I'll be honest with you. Um, in some cases, when it comes down to age of consent, for some people, the age of consent could be 16, 17. In other positions of consent, it could be lower than that. Like prime example, age of consent for children to be sexual, things along those lines, right? For some people and for some cultures, the age of consent could be 14 years old. Now, the reason why I say that, in my opinion, is a problem is because, again, what does anybody really know at the age of 14? what can anybody really do at that age when they're not old enough to drive? They're not old enough to really get a full-time job or any of that. See, these are things again that people don't want to have conversations about. Some people will say, "Oh, it's uncomfortable." Some people will say, "Well, it shouldn't be a concern," but in some instances, it should be a concern because again, how can you expect certain things like structure, great principles, and morality when you're allowing certain things to happen before a certain age? You know? So I said these are the type of conversations that people hate to have, but I don't mind having. Because I feel again we could get to a better place in the playing field if we tackle these topics. You know, like prime example, like I was saying earlier, age of consent for a prime example. You want piercings and tattoos? I've always felt it should be 17 and over, 18 and over. Why? Because again, no child should be worried about getting a tattoo well before their age. You know, that shouldn't be the mindset. But again, if you don't change certain things, you know, how are you gonna get to a better place? You know, I, these things I thought about. Like prime example, by law, the age of consent for kids to or for people to consume alcohol and even cigarettes is supposed to be 18 and old. But in some instances, I feel that should be a little higher because you have some people who are young now who are out there drinking and doing whatever. They really shouldn't be. But again, this is a rabbit hole that, it needs to be delved into deeper. That's the thing. Yes, it is up to the parents, 22. I know. In some situations, it's up to the parents. That's why I say age of consent, especially when it comes down to these younger generations, what should be a proper age of consent for anything that they decide to do. Because again, the focus should be trying to raise and trying to build, better structure when it comes to them. But if you're allowing them to do certain things at a certain point in time, it's not going to help. That's what I'm saying. Like I said, age of consent when it comes to drinking really should be 21 and over. That's how I'm looking at it from that standpoint. Like, prime example, you could be 18 and over and purchase cigarettes, but I feel when it comes down to drinking or any form of those drugs that are being done, should be 21 and over. Why? Because guess what? There are going to be some people in them young teens or even in the 18s that, they're not going to make the right decisions when it comes to that. And then again, you're encouraging something that shouldn't be encouraged. Because now some people will think, well, damn, I can't wait till I turn 18. I can't wait till I'm old enough to do this. The main goal should be, well, when you're an adult, you decide what you're going to do in life. When you at least reach the age of 21, you're a young adult now. You're no longer a teen. You're no longer a young kid. You're no longer a minor. So you're able to make these decisions on your own. See, that's the thing. You want to be able to set these kids up to where when they do get a certain age, they can make their own decisions. But in the same token, you don't want to force certain things neither because it's counteracting what you're trying to build. You know, it's counteracting what you're trying to do. Like some people will say, "Oh, we can't have these type of talks. We should shield ourselves from these type of talks." But if we shield ourselves and we shield these young ones from these talks, how do we expect things to change? From what I was hearing, and that's why I said I'm gonna have a deeper conversation about this on another day. From what I was hearing, the age of consent in Canada is 14. Again, what does a young woman or a young man know about anything at the age of 14? You're still navigating the world around you. You're still trying to come up into your own person. So, what does giving consent to a person that young gonna do? These are things that we need to start bringing back into these discussions. And I plan on doing so. And that's why I said I'm gonna save that discussion for another day. I want to make sure the link is pinned for anybody, especially again you parents out there, because there are some areas where again age of consent is, in my opinion, is too young. Again, what does a child or what does a teen know about anything at age 14, 15? They still discovering who they are as a person, or they still trying to discover who they are as a person. You know, I feel like there are some things that should never be forced again, especially on the young ones. But some of this has to deal with some of the adults too, because again, you're the one that's giving the consent. You know, what age of consent for any parent should be a reasonable one? That's a question that should be asked. And that's what I'm saying. I'm gonna definitely have this talking conversation. I'm not gonna hold y'all. I just wanted to have this quick talk today about the generational building and why it's important, and keep the motivation going. Keep striving for greatness. No matter what you decide to put into the world around you, make sure you put the best around you. And that's the thing, and that is true though. That is true. 22. That's the reason why I say age of consent when it comes to certain things. It should be changed, because you got a lot of weird shit going on out here in this world. Like prime example, if the age of consent for a child is 14, and that means consent to do anything, that's a problem right there. You know, that's a problem, because again, we already are in a position, or we are already in an era where you got manipulators, you have predators. You know, there's a lot of that to take into consideration. Do you really want your child to be preyed on, especially by the wrong type of people? I'm quite sure you wouldn't. And for some of y'all, you would have a problem, especially if your child is of an age of consent to be out there dating, and they end up dating somebody or end up getting with somebody way older than them. That would be a problem to some of y'all. But like I said, that's a conversation we gonna have on another day. I'll most likely try to bring this conversation tomorrow. Not gonna hold y'all because I gotta start slowly getting myself ready. Apparently, I gotta be in the plantation earlier than expected, y'all. So, um, but again, when it comes down to generational building and the blueprints, you have to know exactly what you need. You're gonna have to definitely make sure you're staying on point and staying focused with it. But the main thing again to remember is don't quit. Keep striving for excellence. Keep striving for greatness, and great things will happen. You know, for those that might just be tuning in late, y'all could definitely catch this replay. For those celebrating birthdays this week and celebrating birthdays the rest of this month and most of September, because again, I know it's Virgo season. Hopefully, y'all enjoy yourselves. Another year and another blessing around the sun. Keep creating memories. Make sure you keep yourselves safe, but also observant and vigilant. You know, enjoy every moment that higher power has you here. And when it's all said and done, just remember this. You know, you are still here for a purpose. So don't ever think that you're not. You have some people who didn't get a chance to fully serve their purpose. But then again, that higher power probably already said your purpose is served, kid. So again, don't take advantage of that, and don't take that for granted. You know, while you are here, try to do the best that you can. Try to be the best that you can. And again, don't let nothing stop you. Don't let no type of negative influences, and don't let the wrong mindset plague your mind. Your goal is to have strong spirit, strong mind, but again, just solid backbone. Keep yourself on the up and up. Keep grinding. Keep trying to reach your goals and make sure that you reach your goals and expectations. And even once you've gotten to your mountaintop, the main thing to remember is not falling off that mountaintop. Keep your balance. Keep your head on the swivel. You know, keep reaffirming and re-encouraging yourself that things will be better and that things will continue to get better. Even when things might seem like it's taking a turn for the worse, in some instances it's not. Like I said, that's just a test to see where your mental strength is at, but also your spiritual strength. You are strong mentally, whether you believe that or not. And remember that again, your mind is the most powerful weapon and tool that should be utilized and weaponized. Weaponized for something good. You know, but all in all, though, just a little conversation for the people today. Hey, hold on. I'm looking at the chat now. What you mean? No coffee. James, bring all the coffee cups. Bring all the coffee creamers. For all you tea drinkers, don't worry. We got some tea for you. We got decaf tea. But I feel like that's something important for y'all to think about again. No matter what you decide to do as far as building and growing, and if you still have time to do it, do it. You're never too old to get into something that could be prosperous for you. Again, you just got to be able and willing to take the time out to do it. You got some people who are, like I said, getting into certain business fields now. You know, you're never too old to learn new things. And you're never too old to make something happen. And, it could be done. And you could be that blueprint to showing people how to do it. You know, the main thing you just got to remember is take your time. Don't rush the process. Gain all the vast knowledge that you can gain about what you're building and how you're building it. And remember to market yourself too. That's one thing that's going to help when it comes down to your build. It's just knowing how to market, knowing how to bring the best out of that small product. You know, it could be done. There's multiple ways for it to be done. Again, you just got to be willing to take the necessary steps. Don't rush the process, but don't just sit back on your ass neither and not do nothing. Continue to keep growing, keep prospering. You'll see these things come to the light. And again, I appreciate everybody that's been a part of the build, still becoming a part of the build. And yeah, we still gonna have these conversations. But again, for those who are building on the generational wealth, know the ins and outs on what you bring to the people around you. And make sure that it's going to be beneficial even well after you go. If you want to make it to that place of success, gotta be willing to again do the work, do the research. Knowledge is always going to be power, and knowledge is always going to be key to your success in life. Because if you don't have knowledge in what you're doing, you ain't gonna never get to that mountaintop. You'll be stuck on standstill or stuck in stagnant. So for those who are building as far as the clothing is concerned, don't quit. Even if you got to start off small, you start off small and you work your way to something bigger. And if you already been given some form of a blueprint to that, hey, only thing you got to do is master that blueprint. And also keep adding on to what you need to add on to. And you'll definitely see everything take shape and take form. But I ain't gonna hold y'all much longer. Got to start getting myself prepared. Like I said, tomorrow I'll be back with this conversation, and I will also be asking, and the link will be pinned. The question for the day is: what age should consent really be given to the younger ones? At what point do some of these things change? And even if it's cultural, I feel at some point things in the culture should change for the better. You can't say you're trying to work for something better when in some instances it's working against what you're trying to build better, you know. But I'm gonna get myself up out of here. If y'all was new to the channel, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Shout out to the replay game. Shout out to the Shadow Mafia and the Shadow Babies. Y'all know what it is, baby. If everybody that was in attendance today, y'all already know that love is love and that'll be reciprocated as such. I don't know how to be fake. All I can do is give you real. And that's all I'm gonna do is give you real topics and real builds. And yeah, tomorrow will be a little bit better. And don't worry, I might be setting this live stream up at 2:30, 3 o'clock the latest. Don't plan on going any later than that. So, like I said, I'll definitely be back with the conversation and we're gonna pick up from there. You know, always a pleasure to have y'all here, and this is what we're gonna keep doing. But y'all stay safe, keep that third eye open, and until the next live, we out of here. Peace and blessings.